Welcome to Starbound. If you're tired of AI-generated slop and want real human storytelling, subscribe to this channel. My name's Johnny. Let's begin. For 3 weeks, Gian Ochoa had learned that the silences on Kryos were more dangerous than the noise. The wind was a constant, a roaring beast that kept everything else in hiding. Silence meant things were moving. For the last 2 hours, the howl had dropped to a whisper, and now it was gone. The sudden ringing quiet was absolute, broken only by the drip of melting frost from the pine-like alien trees. It set every nerve in Gian's body on edge. He cracked the hatch of his crashed escape pod and peered out, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The world was a mess of deep blue snow and black, jagged trunks under the pale light of a distant gas giant. He needed more wood for the pathetic fire he kept alive inside, a flicker of defiance against the crushing cold. Before stepping out, he did a quick, desperate inventory. His salvaged axe, the worn multi-tool on his belt, its battery indicator blinking a worrying amber. Tucked into a side pocket was its most power-hungry attachment, a plasma cutter. He checked its independent power cell. Enough for 1 good burn. Maybe 2 if he was lucky. He'd have to make it count. He was heading for a stand of dead wood near the bank of a frozen river when he saw them. Bones. Massive, bleached white ribs, thicker than his thigh, lay half buried in the snow near the water's edge. They were gnawed, splintered. Something huge had died here. Or, more accurately, something huge had been eaten here. A primal chill traced a path down his spine, a cold that seeped from the river ice itself. He gave the dark, unmoving ice of the river a wide berth. That's when he heard it. A faint, pathetic sound carried on the first stirring of the returning wind. A whimper. Every rational instinct, the ones that had kept him breathing for 21 brutal days, screamed at him to turn back, to ignore it, to get the wood and secure the hatch. It was a lure, a trap. But the sound, that pathetic little whimper, cut through his caution like a razor. It was the sound of something small and hopeless, giving up. He turned toward it. He found it in a drift piled against the roots of a colossal, gnarled tree, a scrap of life, half buried and shivering so violently the snow around it trembled. It was a cub. Its fur was the color of tarnished gold, broken by sharp black stripes. It looked like a tiger cub, if a tiger had been designed by an artist with a love for dangerously sharp silhouette and oversized paws. It tried to lift its head, tried to manage a snarl, but the sound that came out was a weak, rattling hiss with no heat behind it. It was starving. Ah, hell, Gian muttered, the words a puff of white vapor in the vast, cold landscape. He knew what this meant. Where there was a cub, there was a mother. A very large, very protective, and likely very hungry mother who would not appreciate a strange, soft-skinned alien messing with her offspring. Leaving it was the smart play. The only play. He looked at the cub, its ribs stark beneath its thin coat, its eyes the color of hardened sap fluttering closed. He thought of the last protein bar in his pack, the one he'd been saving for a day when things got truly desperate. He glanced around at the silent alien forest. Things were already truly desperate. He thought of his grandmother's kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and yeast, the memory so warm and painful it stole the air from his lungs. Damn it all to hell. He shrugged off his heavy thermal coat, a sudden, biting cold a shock to his system. Carefully, he scooped the shivering creature into the coat's folds. It was startlingly light. Back inside the pod, the air was only marginally warmer, but at least it was still. He laid the bundle near the small, crackling fire he'd built in a metal basin. The cub stirred, its black nose twitching. Jian broke off a piece of his last protein bar. It was a dense, nutrient-rich brick that tasted like sweetened cardboard, and it was the only reason he was still breathing. He crumpled a corner into his palm and held it out. The cub sniffed it, its whole body a wire of tension. A tiny, rough tongue flickered out, tasting the offering. Then it ate, a desperate, frantic energy in its small body, its little claws digging into his glove. When the last crumb was gone, it looked up at him with wide, golden eyes that seemed too big for its face. A memory, sharp and bittersweet, surfaced. Jian started to hum, a low, tuneless sound that eventually found its way into a melody, an old lullaby, something his abuela used to sing. Duérmete, mi niño, duérmete, mi amor. The words were ghosts on his tongue, a connection to a world he was certain he'd never see again. The cub, its belly finally containing something other than ice and fear, blinked slowly. The frantic, desperate energy was replaced by a wary curiosity. It watched Jian with its wide, golden eyes, no longer shivering. A low, vibrating sound started in its chest. A purr. Exhausted, Jian slumped back against the cold metal wall. The magnetic lock on the hatch was failing, barely clicking into place. He should fix it, but the thought was a distant cloud. The small, warm weight of the fed cub against his leg was an anchor, and he drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. He woke to an abrupt, absolute cold. The fire had died to embers, and the warmth against his leg was gone. Jian's eyes snapped open. The cub was missing. A spike of adrenaline cut through his grogginess. He scanned the cramped pod. Empty. Then he saw it. The hatch, ajar, a sliver of the frigid pre-dawn landscape visible. The faulty lock. The cub had gotten out, or something had gotten in. He scrambled to the opening, his heart hammering against his ribs. He peered out into the blue-tinged snow. Nothing. Just the silent, black trunks of the alien forest. He'd saved the cub only to lose it to the wilderness or a predator. A hollow ache of failure settled in his gut. Then, a movement at the edge of the trees. A small, striped shape trotted into the clearing. Kyo. The cub was safe. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, a living weapon of striped fur and a dangerously sharp silhouette emerged from the shadows. She stood well over 2 meters tall, a collection of coiled power whose form the fur failed to soften. A leather harness crisscrossed her torso, holding a wicked-looking spear and various pouches. Her face was feline, with high cheekbones, a broad nose, and golden eyes that burned with a cold, intelligent fire. The cub let out a proud, happy chuff, nudged the pod's ramp with its head, then looked back at the towering female, a clear gesture. Here. This is the place. The huntress's gaze locked onto Jian. It wasn't just menace. It was a sharp, piercing assessment. Her eyes flickered from her energetic, well-fed son to Jian, to the pod's interior where the empty protein bar wrapper lay on the floor. An amulet of polished stone and woven metal around her throat began to whir, emitting a garbled string of clicks and whistles. She took a step inside, her head barely clearing the top of the hatch. She didn't duck or hunch. She flowed into the space, her presence compressing the air, making his refuge feel like a cage. The amulet stuttered again. Son. The voice was a low, melodious purr that vibrated in the small space, a dangerous, beautiful sound. The word was clear. She pointed a single, black-clawed finger at the cub, then at him. "You." The finger moved back to the cub. "Safe." Jian didn't move, didn't breathe. She took another silent step, her eyes scanning his meager setup. The salvaged wiring, the sputtering console, the small fire, the worn sleeping bag. It was an assessment, clinical and thorough. She was a predator in his den, and every instinct screamed at him to stay absolutely still. The amulet word again, a little smoother this time. "Debt," she tapped her own chest, "exists." She moved with a liquid silence that was deeply unnerving. The pod, his entire world for 3 weeks, seemed to shrink around her. She circled him, her gaze missing nothing. She wasn't threatening him, not actively, but her stillness was that of a predator, and the small pod felt charged with the promise of a sudden, fatal movement. Her spear, even inert, seemed to hum with menace. "You are not of the clans," she said. The translator was piecing together syntax, the words still clipped but forming a coherent thought. "Not Kryos," she stated it as a fact. "No," Jian said, his voice tight. "My ship crashed." Her eyes, intelligent and piercing, met his. "Alone?" "Yes." A spark arced from the failing power console with a sharp crackle. The cub let out a high-pitched cry of fright and scrambled behind Jian's legs, its little body trembling. Without thinking, Jian reached back, his hand finding the cub's small, shaking form. "Hey, it's okay, little guy," he murmured, his voice automatically gentle. "Just a busted power conduit, nothing to worry about." He kept his eyes on the huntress, his movements slow and deliberate. The woman went utterly still. She watched the interaction, her head tilted slightly. The predatory intensity in her eyes gave way to a focused curiosity, a clear reevaluation of the creature before her. "He does not fear you," she said, the words smoother now. "No reason he should," Jian replied, his hand still resting on the cub's back. "I am Seren," she said, her voice a clear contralto, the purr a constant, resonant hum beneath the words. She gestured to the cub. "He is Kyo." "Jian." "Jian," she repeated, the sound rolling off her tongue as if testing its shape. "My son came to you, cold, hungry." Her eyes flickered to the empty wrapper. "You gave your food." "He needed it more than I did." "The debt exists," she stated again, this time with finality. She straightened to her full, intimidating height. "You are under my protection, my responsibility. Now we hunt. You are weak." Her words left no room for debate. He was being claimed like a piece of salvage. He wasn't sure if he'd just been rescued or taken prisoner. Saren moved through the forest like a ghost. Jian, feeling soft, slow, and devastatingly human, stumbled along behind her. The adrenaline from her arrival had faded, leaving behind a profound, dizzying hunger. The protein bar he'd given Kyo felt like a phantom limb, an ache of phantom sustenance. He tripped over an exposed root, catching himself on a tree trunk, his breath rasping in the thin air. Saren paused, casting a sharp look back at him. She didn't offer a hand or a word of comfort, but he noticed she slowed her pace fractionally. She began to use hand signals, a closed fist for stop, a flick of her fingers for listen, sharp point for look. Jian, a mechanic used to diagnosing problems by sound and feel, found he could read the language of her body surprisingly well. Her movements were a form of communication, each gesture clean and conveying a clear instruction without wasted energy. She froze, holding up a flat palm. Jian stopped, his breath held tight in his chest. Ahead, a herd of six-legged deer-like creatures grazed in a small clearing. They had elegant, sweeping antlers and fur the color of moss. Saren unslung her spear. With a press of her thumb, the tip began to glow with a faint orange light. She didn't throw it. She moved, flowing from shadow to shadow, a predator in her element. The attack was a blur of motion, testifying in its lethal economy. A single, silent strike. Back at the pod, the smell of roasting meat was agonizing. It was a primal, desperate need that transcended simple hunger. Saren carved off a thick slice with a wicked-looking knife and offered it to him on the point. He took it, not caring that it seared his fingertips. The first bite was a rescue. It was rich, savory, and intensely flavorful. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. He ate with a raw, unshielded gratitude, his eyes half closed in bliss. He was vaguely aware of Saren watching him, her expression unreadable as he devoured the piece of meat. She carved another for him, and a smaller one for Keo, before taking any for herself. Protection, it seemed, meant provisioning. The debt was already being repaid, a form of currency he was only beginning to understand. They were a few hours past the twin sunset when a strange distortion appeared on the northern horizon, like heat rising from a frozen road. Saren, who had been quietly observing the pod's failing systems, was on her feet in an instant, her entire demeanor shifting from calm authority to sharp-edged alert. "Skyfire," she growled, the purr in her voice tightening to a snarl of frustration. The air became charged, a pressure building against Jian's eardrums. A low hum seemed to vibrate from his bones, and the fine hairs on his arms lifted. The thermic tip of Saren's spear flickered and died. A small device on her belt, which Jian suspected was some kind of personal cloaking field, went dark. "What is it?" Jian asked, standing. "A magnetic storm," she said, her voice sharp with annoyance. She slapped the side of her spear's haft. "Nothing." "It disrupts the containment fields, our guidance systems, our energy cells. It binds the spirits of the machine." As if on cue, the temperature plummeted. The relative warmth of the day vanished, replaced by a deep, biting cold that promised to flash freeze anything left exposed. The wind picked up, howling with a new, vicious intensity. "We need shelter. Now," Saren stated, her eyes scanning the terrain with a hunter's acuity. But she was looking for known landmarks, things her internal compass would recognize. The warped sky seemed to be disorienting her. Jian's gear, however, was stubbornly analog. His emergency kit was built on principles of rugged simplicity. He pulled out his physical compass. The needle spun erratically. Useless. But his eyes, trained by a lifetime of looking at physical things, saw the world differently. He ignored the chaotic sky and focused on the geology. "There," he said, pointing toward a dark slash in a nearby rock face. "An overhang. Might be deep enough." They scrambled towards it, the wind tearing at them. It was shallow, barely a scoop out of the rock, offering little protection. The cold was a physical thing, sinking its teeth into him. A violent shiver racked his body. "Not good enough," Saren said, pulling Keo deeper into her cloak. Jian's teeth were chattering. "Look at the rock strata," he forced out, pointing past the overhang. "The way it angles down, there should be erosion, a cave system, or a washout." He started moving, stumbling along the rock face, his gloved hand tracing the stone. "You cannot know that," she challenged. But she followed, her trust in his strange logic apparently greater than her trust in the storm-blinded landscape. He was beginning to lose feeling in his fingers when he found it. A fissure, partially hidden by a snowdrift. A breath of air, marginally less cold than the gale, drifted out. Here. It was a tight squeeze at first, but it opened into a proper cave, a space carved by ancient winds, deep enough to cut the howling gale to a manageable moan. It was a pocket of absolute darkness and still air. The fearsome huntress prime owed her survival to his specific knowledge, a new and unsettling dynamic. Jian managed to get a small fire going with his spark stick and a handful of dry tinder from his pack. The flames cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, a tiny pocket of warmth and life against the crushing indifference of the planet. They sat in silence for a while, Kryos sleeping peacefully in a nest of their cloaks between them. The fire crackled. The storm raged outside. "This debt," Saren said finally, her voice low and serious in the enclosed space. She was looking into the fire, but Jian knew she was speaking to him. "You need to understand what it means." He waited, feeding a small branch into the flames. "Among the Ashkavan," she began, "a life given must be repaid. A debt for a child, for the continuation of a bloodline, is the most sacred. The law is absolute. By saving my son, you have been bound to my clan." Jian frowned. "Bound? What does that mean?" "It means you are no longer an outsider. You are Ashkavan, under my authority as Huntress Prime of the Silent Forest clan. Your safety is my responsibility. Your sustenance is my duty. Your life is now tied to mine and to Kryos." She looked at him, her golden eyes intense. "You have lost your clan. Now, you have a new one." The weight of it settled on him. It was a consequence, not a choice he'd made. He was property, in a way. Protected property, but still. He had lost his ship, his crew, his species, and now his independence. Every decision, every hope of rescue he might have clung to, was now subject to her authority. He looked out at the mouth of the cave, at the chaotic, distorted sky. He had nothing left of his old life. Maybe being a protected member of an alien warrior clan was better than being a frozen corpse. "So, I'm yours now," he said, the words tasting like rust. "You are ours," she corrected, her gaze flicking to the sleeping Kryos. "You belong to the clan. You are protected. That is the debt." The firelight caught the sharp planes of her face. Her gaze held his. "A gift binds for a moment. This binds for a lifetime. It is a chain." A few days after the storm, they were tracking a herd of six-legged grazers again. This time, the hunt went wrong. A bull, larger than the others, with a rack of antlers like sharpened spears, broke from the herd and charged. Saren met it head-on, a fluid dance of predator and prey. But the bull was powerful, and in the chaos, its antlers struck her spear with a high-pitched crack that echoed through the forest. She dispatched the beast, but her primary tool was damaged. The focusing node of the thermic blade, a complex web of interlinked filaments, had been knocked out of alignment. The blade now sputtered, a weak, unstable flicker of heat. Saren's face was a mask of cold frustration. She tried to reseat the node with her claws, but the mechanism was too fine, its tolerances too narrow. "It is useless," she snarled, disgust thick in her voice. A broken weapon was a death sentence. "Let me see," Jian said, holding out a hand. She looked at him, then at the spear, and after a moment's hesitation, reluctantly handed it over. To Jian, the spear wasn't a magic weapon. It was a machine, a power source, a conduit, an emitter. He saw the problem immediately. The impact had slightly warped the housing for the node, meaning it no longer made a perfect connection with the power conduits. He sat down, pulled out his multi-tool, and unfolded the delicate manipulator pincers. "Hold this steady," he instructed. Saren knelt, holding the heavy haft of the spear as still as a statue, watching him with an unnerving focus. Jian went to work. His fingers, accustomed to threading microscopic wires and calibrating sensitive instruments, moved with a steady confidence born of repetition. He couldn't fix the warped housing, not out here, but he could bypass it. He carefully rerouted a hair-thin power filament, jury-rigged a new connection using a conductive strip salvaged from a dead battery, and painstakingly reseated the node at a slightly new angle, locking it in place with a drop of industrial sealant from his kit. It was an ugly fix, a clever, desperate patch, but it was a fix. "Try it now," he said, sitting back, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple despite the cold. Saren took the spear, her expression skeptical. She thumbed the activator. The blade hummed to life, a steady, brilliant orange, brighter than before. She swung it, cutting a clean, molten line through the air. She looked from the glowing blade to Jian. The respect in her eyes was a tangible thing now. It was potent and new. He wasn't just gentle. He wasn't just an oddity to be protected. His ingenuity was a different kind of strength, a form of power she had never encountered. He didn't just survive. He adapted. He solved problems she couldn't. He had restored her weapon, her lethality, her very identity as a huntress. In her world, competence was everything, and he had just proven his in a language she understood perfectly. The broken spear was a wake-up call. "A single hunter is a target," Saren said that evening, her voice grim. "We need to be smarter." "I have an idea," Jian said. He took a stick and began sketching in the snow. "Leverage. A deadfall trap. A big one. We find a game trail somewhere with a natural bottleneck." He drew a diagram of a trigger mechanism, a complex arrangement of ropes and balanced weights. "I can design the trigger. I need your strength to haul the log and set the counterweights." She studied his drawing, her sharp mind immediately grasping the physics of it. A slow smile spread across her face, revealing the tips of her canines. "This is a mender's cunning. I like it." They worked together all the next day. It was a new dynamic, a partnership forged in the snow. He would explain a principle, fulcrums, potential energy, tripwire tension, and she would translate it into immediate, powerful action. She hauled a massive dead log into position with an ease that left him breathless. He, in turn, wove the intricate trigger from salvaged cable and carved the delicate release mechanism with his knife. They were a two-person engineering team, his mind and her muscle in perfect sync. They finished as the twin suns began to set, casting long blue shadows across the snow. They hid themselves in a thicket of pines downwind and waited. It didn't take long. A lone grazer, a young one, separated from the herd, wandered down the trail. It nudged the tripwire. The result was instantaneous and brutal. The log crashed down with a sound like thunder, and then there was silence. They stood over their success, panting slightly in the thin, cold air. A cloud of their shared breath hung between them. They looked at the kill, then at each other. The look was one of mutual triumph, of shared victory. But underneath it, a different kind of hunger stirred, an undisguised predatory heat that was all about the competent, powerful partner standing beside them. The blizzard that followed was a white nightmare, a wall of wind and snow that forced them back to the pod and kept them there. The small space, once Jian's solitary kingdom, was now crowded with 2 adults, 1 cub, and a mountain of unspoken history. There was only 1 sleeping bag. They gave it to Kyo, who immediately burrowed into its depth and fell asleep. That left Jian and Saren to huddle together for warmth on the cold floor plates, their backs against the wall. Jian tried to focus on the fire, but his awareness was pinned to his left side. He could feel the heat radiating from her through his clothes, a stark, living warmth against the sleeping cold. Her shoulder pressed against his. The clean, metallic scent of her fur, mingled with wood smoke and the charged air of the storm outside, filled his senses. When her arm brushed his as she shifted, the contact felt less like an accident and more like a brand. He held his breath, waiting for a sign, a word, anything to break the suffocating quiet. He chanced to glance at her. She was staring into the flames, her profile carved from shadow and firelight. She was utterly still, but it was the coiled tension of immense power held in perfect check. He knew, with absolute certainty, that she felt it too. A current passing between them in the charged quiet. The blizzard howled, a lonely sound that only amplified the intensity of their confinement. When the blizzard broke, a fragile peace settled over the snow-covered world. That night, after they had eaten, the atmosphere in the pod was different. The tension hadn't vanished, but had transmuted, simmering into a new kind of heat. Saren gently nudged Kyo toward his sleeping bag. The cub, full and sleepy, curled up without protest. Then she turned to Jian. The space between them crackled. "The law of debt is fulfilled," she said, her voice a low, resonant purr. "You are clan. You are protected." She took a step closer, her golden eyes glowing in the firelight. "But the law is only the beginning of the story." He waited, his heart starting its frantic drumming again. "A huntress prime chooses a mate," she continued, her voice dropping even lower. "A partner, one who brings strength to the clan. Our strength has always been the kill, the hunt, the warrior's path." She was so close now he could feel the heat of her body. "I have never seen a strength like yours, a quiet, thinking strength that mends what is broken and builds what is needed. A strength that perceives the world differently than we do. It saved my son when my claws could not. It restored my spear. It is a strength I wish to bind to mine." She lifted a hand and placed it flat on his chest, right over his heart. The touch was possessive, a claim. "The debt made you clan, Jian," she declared, her eyes locking with his. "I make you my mate." Her words were a declaration, absolute and final, a choice, and after everything they had been through, after the fear and the hunger and the shared triumphs, he found there was no part of him that wanted to refuse. He closed the small distance between them, his calloused hand coming up to cup the side of her face, his fingers tangling in fur softer than anything he'd ever imagined. He leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was a collision. Her lips were firm, demanding. He felt the sharp, thrilling edge of a canine against his lip, a reminder of the predator she was. The act was far from gentle. It was a mutual declaration, a desperate claiming after days of suffocating restraint, a raw and honest expression of everything that had grown between them in the silence and the snow. The journey to Saren's clan village took them through a landscape of breathtaking, brutal beauty. Jagged black peaks clawed at the sky, and vast forests of silica-laced trees that glittered under the light of the twin suns. To reach the warmer, more sheltered valley where her people lived, they had to cross the Great Bitter River, a wide, fast-flowing torrent of glacial meltwater. The same river he'd seen gnawed the bones beside. "The water is treacherous," Saren had warned, "and hungry." She constructed a sturdy raft from fallen logs, lashed together with tough, fibrous vines. Jian sat in the middle, helping steer with a makeshift paddle, while Kyo rode on his shoulders. his small claws gently hooked into the fabric of Jian's jacket. They were halfway across, fighting the powerful current, when Kyo let out a sharp, questioning chuff and pointed a tiny claw at a ripple in the water just ahead of them. The ripple was unnatural, sleek, and deliberate against the current. The memory of the bones flashed in Jian's mind. Before he could shout a warning, the water exploded. A creature exploded from the depths, a nightmarish fusion of eel and crocodile. It was massive, its body a slick, black coil of muscle as thick as a tree trunk, its jaw unhinged to a grotesque degree, lined not with bone, but with rows of jagged, translucent blades of cartilage that glittered like shards of ice. It lunged, its maw gaping, aiming directly for the smallest, most vulnerable target on the raft, Kyo. Instinct. It was the only thing that moved fast enough. Saren roared, a sound of pure, primal fury that echoed off the canyon walls. She met the creature head-on, shoving the haft of her spear into its gaping mouth to keep its cartilage-bladed jaws from snapping shut, a desperate, staggering feat of strength. The monster thrashed, its powerful body slamming against their raft, threatening to capsize them and plunge them all into the freezing water. Jian's own instincts screamed. He shoved Kyo off his shoulders, pushing the terrified cub toward the relative safety of the back of the raft. "Stay down!" he yelled. His first thought was to help Saren, but he knew his weight would be useless. His engineer's mind took over. He couldn't fight the creature, but he could fight the environment. His eyes scanned the riverbank they were approaching. Upstream, a colossal half-dead tree leaned precariously over the water, held by a few thick straining roots, a structural failure waiting to happen. While Saren grunted with effort, her muscles straining, Jian sprinted across the lurching raft, took a reckless leap, and landed splashing in the shadows. He scrambled up the muddy incline, his multi-tool already in his hand. He ripped the plasma cutter from his belt. One good burn. He thumbed the ignition. The tool screamed to life, a blade of pure white-hot energy. He threw himself at the tree's remaining roots, driving the plasma blade deep. Wood and earth vaporized with a deafening hiss. The cutter shrieked in protest, its power cell dying as he pushed it to its limit, severing the last anchor. With a groan that shook the very ground, the tree crashed down into the river with the force of a meteor strike, landing directly on the thrashing predator's back. The creature let out a gurgling shriek of agony. The momentary paralysis was all the opening Saren needed. With a final triumphant roar, she ripped her spear free and drove the glowing thermic tip down into the monster's exposed skull. The impact of the falling tree threw Jian backward. He landed hard, his arm catching on a sharp, whipping branch that tore through his sleeve and sliced his flesh open from elbow to wrist. Pain, white-hot and immediate, flared up his arm. He staggered to his feet, clutching the wound, his vision swimming. Saren was already there, leaping from the raft to his side in a single fluid motion. Her face was a maelstrom of emotions, lingering battle fury, stark fear, and a wave of overwhelming relief that softened the hard lines of her features. "You are hurt," she said, her voice tight. She grabbed his arm, her touch surprisingly gentle, as she examined the deep gash. Blood was welling up, staining his sleeve a dark, ugly red. Without a word, she ripped a long strip from the bottom of her own tunic and began wrapping his wound with swift, knowledgeable motions. Jian looked from his clumsily bandaged arm to her fierce, worried face, to the raft where Kyo was now peeking over the edge, trembling but safe. They had done it. Together. She finished tying the knot and looked up, her golden eyes meeting his. The look she gave him was one of absolute, unshakable certainty. It held a universe of meaning, respect, gratitude, partnership. Ours. The word echoed in his mind, a silent, powerful affirmation of the bond now sealed not just by custom, but in shared battle, in blood and scars. That night, they made camp on the far side of the river. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the dull, throbbing ache in Jian's arm. He sat by the fire, watching Saren as she meticulously cleaned and sharpened her spear. He noticed a slight, lingering tremble in her hand as she worked the whetstone. The aftermath of the fight, the near loss of her son, of him, had left its mark. She caught him looking, her hand stilled. For a long moment, she just stared at the spear, then set it carefully aside. The silence that fell between them was different now, no longer taut with unspoken questions, but settled into a quiet space of shared history. She moved to sit beside him, her thigh pressing against his. Then she did something that surprised him. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into an embrace that wasn't about passion or claiming him. It was about desperate, bone-deep relief. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, and he could feel the solid, vulnerable warmth of her against him. "I thought," she began, her voice tight and muffled against his skin. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Jian didn't say anything. He just held her, one hand stroking her back, feeling the powerful muscles tense and then slowly, finally, begin to relax. He was holding the huntress prime of the Ashkavan, and in that moment, he finally understood the profound fear she hid so carefully beneath her warrior's pride. They made one last stop before heading to her village, the escape pod. It sat in the snow, a dead metal shell, a tomb for a life that was no longer his. They were there to salvage the last useful items, the medkit, the remaining fire starters. While Saren packed, Jian stood before the cockpit. He placed a hand on the cold, frosted hull. Inside, a console screen flickered, a ghost of power running through it. For a fraction of a second, an image appeared on the dark surface. The pod's default screensaver, a stock photo of a smiling, unfamiliar human family on a green lawn. Earth. A life of soft grass and easy sunshine he would never know again. For a moment, a wave of profound loss washed over him, so powerful it made him dizzy. His crew, his home, everything he had been. He pressed his forehead against the cold metal, a silent goodbye. He had fought. He had survived, and he had clung to a phantom hope of rescue. Now, he had to let it go. He took a deep breath, the frigid air burning his lungs, and pushed himself away from the pod. He turned his back on the wreck, on the ghost on the screen, and walked towards Saren, who was waiting with Kyo at the edge of the clearing. He had made his choice. "We are 2 days' walk from my village," Saren said, slinging the pack over her shoulder. She looked at Jian, at his bandaged arm and the quiet, steady confidence in his eyes. A possessive, proud smirk touched her lips. "My clan will be curious. An off-worlder is unusual." "I can imagine," Jian said with a dry chuckle. Her smirk widened. "Let them look. They will see the mender who thinks like a hunter. They will see the gentle hands that can break the earth. They will see the strength I have chosen." Her words were a shield and a banner, a declaration to her entire world. She was not just accepting him, she was proud of him. A laugh escaped Jian's lips. Not a sarcastic huff or a weary chuckle, but a real, genuine laugh that started deep in his chest. It felt good. It felt like coming home. He adjusted Kyo, who was riding on his shoulders again, chuffing happily and playing with a loose strand of Jian's hair. He reached out, his fingers finding Saren's and tangled them together. Her hand was strong and warm, a perfect fit for his. "Too bad for them," he said, meeting her brilliant golden gaze. The future was a terrifying, unknown country. But looking at her, at the fierce loyalty in her eyes, and feeling the small, trusting weight of the cup on his shoulders, he knew he wasn't facing it alone. "I'm pretty sure I've already got my family." She stopped walking. Her eyes softened, and she pulled him into a slow, deep kiss that tasted of victory and forever. It was a kiss of equals, a promise made in the pale light of two suns. Kyo, squished happily between them, let out a contented, rumbling purr. Together, the three of them turned and walked toward the rising suns and a life he had never expected, but one he would fight for with everything he had.